On September 15, 1964, Bumpy Johnson sat at the Palm Café in Harlem, enjoying coffee and cigars with associates. Officers Patrick Sullivan and James Kowalski stormed in, shouting he was under arrest for gambling, narcotics, and assault. Their attempt was aggressive, badges visible, hands on weapons. Johnson looked up calmly, asking, "Which paycheck came in this week, Sullivan? Vincent Gigante or City Hall?" Sullivan, enraged, used racial slurs while trying to pull him from his chair, but Johnson's strength kept him seated. 2 minutes later, Detective Marcus Thompson, one of the few black officers in the precinct, entered. He demanded to see the arrest warrant and questioned the officer's probable cause. The café fell silent as Thompson confronted them, refusing to allow an illegitimate arrest. Johnson remained calm, observing as Thompson forced the corrupt officers to step back. This moment transformed a routine arrest into a confrontation that would shake the NYPD and set the stage for Johnson's audacious retaliation. The failed arrest was only the beginning of a carefully orchestrated plan that would expose corruption and give Johnson the leverage he needed. After being thwarted by Thompson, Sullivan and Kowalski left the café shaken. Johnson, calm and collected, knew exactly how to respond. Within hours, Kowalski was approached by Johnson's men near his home and escorted to a secure Bronx warehouse. Politely but firmly, they explained that cooperation was in his best interest. Johnson demanded confessions about bribes from Vincent Gigante and names of corrupt officers. Kowalski initially resisted, but after careful persuasion, he began writing, documenting not only his own corruption, but 23 other officers. Sullivan followed a similar fate. Johnson didn't harm them permanently. Instead, he used intelligence and leverage. Their confessions revealed systemic corruption spanning nearly 40% of the 28th precinct, multiple bribes, and illegal activities linked to politicians. Johnson had transformed the failed arrest into an opportunity, turning corrupt cops into instruments of his strategy. Knowledge and documentation had replaced violence, giving him unmatched control over the precinct, Vincent Gigante's operations, and the future of Harlem's underworld. The confessions produced by Kowalski and Sullivan were meticulously detailed. Kowalski listed 23 officers, including bribes and illegal activities. Sullivan's confession was even more comprehensive, detailing 8 years of corruption, payments from Vincent Gigante, and small bribes from City Councilman Robert Hayes. Together, the confessions exposed 47 corrupt officers in one precinct, nearly half the force. Johnson's brilliance was turning the officers' misdeeds into leverage. He didn't rely on intimidation or brute force, he used information as a weapon. Each confession documented crimes, dates, bribe amounts, and complicit politicians. This gave Johnson unassailable control. Any retaliation from the NYPD or Gigante risked immediate exposure and federal prosecution. Johnson had taken a moment of vulnerability, the failed arrest, and turned it into a tool of dominance. Knowledge, strategy, and leverage were now his allies, and he was ready to confront the NYPD directly, holding undeniable proof of corruption. With confessions in hand, Johnson made his boldest move yet. He walked into the 28th Precinct headquarters with attorney Theodore Green and 2 bodyguards. Officers understood immediately the audacity of his action. Johnson demanded a meeting with Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Chen, presenting copies of the confessions. He explained the network of corruption, 47 officers, payments from Vincent Gigante, and political bribes. He made his terms clear. He wanted peace, not chaos. In exchange for ending harassment of his operations, he offered the NYPD a way to avoid a scandal that could destroy the department. The threat was implicit. Continued corruption or retaliation would trigger public exposure. Morrison and Chen realized Johnson held all leverage. The criminal had outmaneuvered the precinct without violence, proving intelligence and documentation could surpass authority and power. Johnson calmly presented the evidence, explaining that Sullivan and Kowalski were safe and would be released once an agreement was reached. He demanded an end to harassment from corrupt officers, but allowed legitimate investigations. Morrison and Chen were forced into a corner. They could ignore him and risk exposing corruption, or comply and preserve the department's reputation. Johnson's confidence and meticulous preparation left no doubt. He controlled the situation. This negotiation illustrated a core principle. Leverage, not violence, was the ultimate power. By holding documented confessions, Johnson neutralized threats both from corrupt officers and criminal competitors. For the NYPD, Johnson wasn't just a criminal, he was a strategist who had exposed the vulnerabilities of a corrupt system and forced them to acknowledge his terms. On September 19th, Sullivan and Kowalski were released exactly as promised. Bruised but unharmed, they returned to the precinct, reporting they had been kidnapped by unknown parties. The official narrative obscured Johnson's involvement, preserving his secrecy. Both officers were suspended but faced no criminal charges. Johnson's strategy worked perfectly. The confessions had ensured their compliance, and the threat of exposure prevented future harassment. The officers who once tried to arrest him illegally now understood the consequences of corruption. Fear, leverage, and intelligence had reshaped behavior in the precinct, proving Johnson's methods were more powerful than violence or intimidation. After September 1964, fabricated arrests, harassment, and bribes in Harlem decreased dramatically. Officers knew Johnson possessed undeniable evidence of corruption and would use it if necessary. Vincent Gigante's strategy to harass Johnson failed because the criminal had anticipated and documented every move. Detective Thompson noted that Sullivan and Kowalski became honest officers, demonstrating that strategic fear and leverage could reform behavior. Johnson had not only protected his operations, but reshaped the balance of power in Harlem. Intelligence, careful planning, and documentation had proven far stronger than weapons or brute force, creating a precedent for how power could be wielded without direct violence. Bumpy Johnson's September 1964 actions became legendary. The confessions were destroyed after his death, but their impact endured. The NYPD, local politicians, and organized crime all learned that corruption left vulnerabilities. Johnson had demonstrated that strategic leverage, not violence, could control both criminals and corrupt authorities. By turning knowledge into power, Johnson neutralized threats, secured his operations, and forced the system to negotiate. The lesson of September 1964 was clear. Documentation, intelligence, and leverage could outweigh brute force. Johnson's legacy in Harlem became one of strategy, foresight, and the ultimate demonstration that smart power could triumph over authority, violence, and corruption.